Hi, not to be shy, Bishop Shane. Thank you very much for your positive vision for this parish and a sense that we are heading towards something that God is calling us. I was just wondering about the Shape of Parish Ministry. I know it's underway and will be heading towards the fall synod. But do you have any comments that you'd like to make as to what you see emerging from that work to date, or anything you want to say about it?
Thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know, the Shape of Parish Ministry consultation reflects really the top priority of our church at this time. Our top strategic priority is communications, but the pandemic has sped that up very significantly, as we see. But the Shape of Parish Ministry is the work that our generation is called to do. I believe that very firmly. We have been shaped by the changes I referred to in the homily, and I believe we need to guide change rather than be changed. And so this consultation is very real, very sincere. It is about bishop, clergy, and people working together to give a new shape to our parish ministry. So what does that mean in real terms? The first phase of the consultation involved every parish kind of taking a picture of themselves in a sense, looking at what do we look like right now. And part of that picture was the responses of the leaders of each parish to various questions. And part of it was the data we've been collecting for a long time, but we summarized the last 10 years so that everyone could kind of look at their own snapshot of where they're at this point in time, but also look at the snapshots of every other parish. So there's a compendium of all the profiles that were produced, which anyone can look at. So you can see how you are, what your picture looks like, as well as everyone else. Stage 2, where we're at right now, every parish has been given a toolkit which is unique to that parish. A number of the questions are the same, but the toolkit has been tailored to have each parish respond to what's happening in their own specific context. Some of the questions have to do with various structures and operations in our diocese as a whole. The responses from all those toolkits will be used to help us give shape to a number of proposals, which will be drafted and then tested in regional meetings, revised, circulated once more, and finally brought to synod for approval. These are motions that affect all of us, in a sense. In some cases, parishes such as the Church of the Resurrection courageously did may make a decision on their own to say, now's the time to amalgamate, to close, to become a chapel. But in other situations, we want to know where parishes see themselves 4 or 5 years from now. And where there's energy in a certain region, we want to get under that quickly to say, well, look, let's talk about a different way of doing ministry in your area, which could involve a number of things. What's important in all of this is how we think about what we're doing, how we think about ourselves as a diocesan church. It's time to stop thinking of ourselves as a bunch of parishes, but to think of ourselves as a diocesan church which has 2 arms. One arm is our community ministries, which are very strong. The other arm is our parish ministries. The parts of our parish ministry invariably have experienced decline and are concerned about the future. But the body is very strong. We have financial resources, we have skills, we have opportunities to work with partners that may not be possible in any one parish, but is possible when we approach this as a diocesan church, as a body with 2 arms. And so how we think about the changes, how we think about guiding change, is the most difficult thing for us to get our heads around, because it's what they might call cultural change. When this church was built, we knew that if we popped an Anglican church into a new suburb, it would be filled. And the congregation could support a mortgage. And it would be this self-contained, self-supporting, vital ministry, as Church of the Resurrection enjoyed for 50 years, as St. Thomas has been enjoying for much longer than that. We can't think like that anymore. We are a body with two arms, and we need to use our collective resources and will to give shape to parish ministry. So part of what we will do is to look for any opportunity to strengthen parish ministry in existing buildings, in existing places. A part of that may be a need to disestablish some churches, which means the building, not the people. In other cases, there may need to be an amalgamation of some kind. In other places, parishes may become chapels, or they may become what I am calling a pastoral parish, which means there's enough people, but there's not enough financial resources. And we need to address that. We need to think differently. We can address each situation when we consider our collective strength. Okay? So a number of the questions that are asked in the toolkit relate to things like how we provide funds for priestly ministry. Right now, it's more or less linked to whether or not each parish can afford a priest or two. It would be wonderful if I could say we need 70 priests in our diocese in order to meet need and opportunity, and this is how much money we need together, and we raise that money through endowment, through offerings of the faithful, through property rentals, and we have a pool of funds which the bishop can use to deploy clergy in ways that are a little bit less based on whether or not one place can afford one or two priests. I don't know if we're ready for that, but I hope we're able to kind of push our thinking about some of the structures and some of our operations, you might say. So this is happening. If we don't guide change, we will continue to be changed by the constant movement of secularism and pluralism in the community around us. We will be smaller, but we will be mighty. We will perhaps borrow from our partners in the Diocese of Jerusalem, where the parish base is quite small, but their institutions are huge, major provider of healthcare and education. We are the largest provider of supportive housing for women in the city of Ottawa. Our church, your church, my church, the diocesan church. Perhaps we'll have a smaller parish base, but we will still be very present in terms of serving the world. One more thing. Parishes must be seen as a resource to the community around them. So if we're struggling to pay clergy and keep a roof over our heads, and we're fundraising to pay our bills, that is not healthy. Because we're saying to the community, we are needy, when we want to say we are a resource. So wherever there's a parish, it needs to be funded and resourced in a way which allows us to say to the community around us, we are here for you. We are here to serve in our context in whatever way. Because that's a lot better brand to have than come and buy our old stuff so we can pay our priest, right? Not good. We want to say if we're going to do fundraising, it's for you. It's for some cause, not for us, because we're good. We've got our house in order. Okay, long answer, but great question. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Bishop. I was really struck in your, please come forward, Marion. I was very much struck in your homily how your own personal biography is in some ways a story that leads to potential options moving forward into the future. You came as a family that needed to be welcomed. As strangers in a community that needed to be welcomed. You came into a parish context where it was an ecumenical experiment with the United Church and the Anglican Church at the Church of the Resurrection, doing something different that hadn't been done. This is in the 1960s. And your connection to this church as well, as you mentioned, and seeing over time how, as you said, a courageous decision was taken by the Church of the Resurrection to try to make a move that we could collectively be stronger in South Ottawa in imagining together whatever the future of church needs to be in our area. And so it's kind of coming, having you here this morning in some respects, is coming full circle.
One thing related to that, the city of Ottawa is expanding. The last time we changed the parish footprint of our diocese was probably around the time this building was built and Church of the Resurrection was established. We stopped buying land and establishing church parishes as the city has grown. We need to remedy that. But the difference would be now is that our diocese needs to decide where it wants a new parish, needs to help resource it, and we will always do it in partnership. No more clubhouses. So what you have here is a campus or a village of different partners working together. That's a model, and good for you. That's a model that we will do should we establish new parish churches in some of the expanding areas of Ottawa. We will always do it with a partner, whether it's affordable housing or some sort of community service. We know how to do that. You know how to do that here, and we need to use those skills, largely from our community ministries, to create partnerships. So we're very much a resource whenever we build a new parish church, and I hope we do. I really hope we do. So, question?
Mary.
So, one of my questions is, there a way to support some of these movements of change without having to have an individual vestry vote, in terms of could it come from the diocese then, instead of individual churches having to vote every time you want to change something?
Well, that's a really good point. The short answer is yes. You know, if we meet at Synod this fall and a mandate comes from Synod to me as bishop to say, we want to establish, you know, different structures in these places, or we believe there needs to be, strongly believe there needs to be amalgamations here, there, and everywhere, the bishop has certain authorities that can be exercised to make things happen. And, you know, you don't want to use that too often, and when you do use it, you want to be judicious. But it is possible for the bishop to initiate the disestablishment of a parish. Ideally, people will do, again, those of you who were at the Church of the Resurrection with Michael's pastoral leadership, hopefully it's a measured, careful decision, and it's a decision made with intent. You know, the vestry of the Church of the Resurrection said, but we want our assets to come to St. Thomas in order to, and we're going to largely come to St. Thomas too. That's the best kind of decision to make, where people, because it's not about, it's about where people end up if we do close a church. You know, we're not abandoning anyone, but how we deliver ministry will almost certainly need to change. And that may be guided, you know, by the authority of the bishop. Okay.
Good morning, Bishop Shane. My name's Tom Bryant. He said, feed my sheep. And I'm interested in your perspective from the diocesan level of which sheep need what kind of feeding. I've been part of the community gardening initiative here with Derwin Sangster's very capable leadership. And we didn't really know where we were going, and several good things happened. We have more land that we could put under the plow, in a sense. And there's some discussion about whether we are making opportunities available for individuals and families to make use from out of our community to make use of that. We've also had some discussion about community education, things that children could learn with a butterfly garden, for example. And as part of our community garden, we asked the private gardeners in our space to give at least 10% of the produce to the Heron Emergency Food Center. But the core gardeners from this congregation also built 4 additional plots that produced food for the Heron Emergency Food Center. We'd be interested in your guidance in terms of perhaps what other parishes are doing to grow food for people and how that should be distributed. I think we're heading into a discussion soon, because hopefully we'll be ceding some land soon, about the balance between making our community assets available to individuals and using them to support things like the food center.
Great. Thanks very much. If you have not seen the anniversary lecture with Jason McKinney, so our diocese has produced a number of anniversary lectures. He talked about the church as commons and basically made the point that we don't hold land for ourselves, we hold land for the community. And I think what you're talking about really does relate to that. How do we use our land to serve others rather than our private property that we keep people away? How do we bring people in, and how do we use it to good purpose? I know there are other community gardens in our diocese, but what you have done is something every parish needs to do, is to look at your context. You know, talk to people in social services in your region, in your part of the city or in your county or whatever, and discern where there is need. And discern whether or not you have the ability to meet that need. And you might be surprised at what the needs are, and you might be surprised at your capacity to do a good thing, because people want, you know, we're made from love for love, and if there's a good thing, people will be involved. So, you know, the process of discerning how best to serve and feed your community is one that each parish should undertake. And it will be different in each place depending on location, but more importantly, depending on what need is around. And don't take a guess at what that need is, study it. You mentioned, you know, there's a food cupboard here. Well, that's a defined need. You're not guessing, you're clearly working in partnership and so on. So that's what's important. Is discernment is a very spiritual word. You know, we discern our path forward. We need to discern where, you know, humanity is in pain and need, disadvantaged, and to look to ourselves to see what resources do we have as a parish church to mobilize and to try to meet that. Does that answer your question? Good, thank you.
I could follow up with Tom on a couple of points, but I'll save that for another time. I'm particularly interested, though, in Bishop, in any further thoughts you might have about what you termed, I guess, in part 4 of the parish profile, an annual stewardship cycle. Mm-hmm. That's a term that kind of a new one for a number of folks, and I'm curious to know just how you might elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. Thanks, Derwin. In terms of an annual stewardship cycle, we do not need more evidence to show us that it works. An annual stewardship cycle is simply a pattern that you follow over the course of the year, usually beginning with vestry. When you create a budget, you need to communicate that budget. You need to communicate with those who are members of your parish and potential donors to your parish, and you keep up a communication, usually leading to some sort of pledge package that goes out in the latter part of the year. Most people don't return their pledge package, but they do read it, and it does affect thinking. When people return their pledge package, there's also usually a part in it which says, what gifts do you have or interests do you have that you would like to share with the parish church? So not only does it generally increase offerings, it also helps you recruit people for various positions because you get to know. Some parishes in their annual cycle, if they're a good size, will actually have direct communication with each parishioner every year. Others, it's simply a mail-out. But we know that an annual stewardship cycle will steadily consolidate and probably increase givings with other things. So it's a tool we are completely equipped to help every parish put in place. When I say we at Ascension House, our diocesan office, there's enough staff and resources there, along with our stewardship working group, to enable every parish to develop an annual stewardship cycle. Only about 30% of our parishes have taken advantage of that. So a decision that could be made at Synod, for example, is that we are requiring every parish to be more intentional about an annual stewardship cycle and to learn what that means and how to implement it. Because when that's not happening, to speak plainly, parishes that have generous offerings and are effectively subsidizing those who aren't, right? So it's in our mutual interest as the diocesan church to make sure everybody's engaged. Having said that, I really want every parish to think about 3 streams of revenue to support their ministries. 3 streams of revenue. The first and most important would be the offerings of the faithful. You, as individuals, as families. The amount you generously give to your parish ministry every year is a really important stream of revenue. A second stream of revenue derives from how we use our property. Almost certainly there's some revenue that comes to St. Thomas from the use of your property, not for major capitalism development here, but just using it wisely, there's a return. And the third is one that's very underdeveloped, and that is endowment. If you love your church and want to see its ministry continuing, leave it some money in your will, whatever amount. The cathedral, for example, about 15% of its revenue comes from its endowments. I would be happy if every parish in the diocese derived at least 40% of its income from endowments, if not more, because it means we are well resourced. So those three streams of revenue are the best way to support a parish church: the offerings of the faithful, revenue from property wherever possible, and establishing endowment programs. A lot of people love their church and would be happy to leave some money to enable its ministry for all time. Fundraising is the least reliable, and as I said earlier, potentially the worst reputation risk you could have. If you're relying heavily on fundraising to support your parish ministry, the message you're giving to your community is that we need money to stay afloat. That's not a good posture to have when we're called to serve, So, really important. There are tools that are known to work well, whether it's stewardship cycles, whether it's enabling an endowment program, or even ways to use property creatively. We know how to do that, and that's definitely the way forward. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup d'être venu nous visiter aujourd'hui. My question is about Cursillo. I wanted to know what your opinion and involvement is with Cursillo, and is it something that you recommend to all parishioners?
Good, thank you. So I made my Cursillo, as they say, in 1984. And in recent months, I've had a very close association with the Secretariat of the Ottawa Anglican Cursillo movement. And I've been very clear with them that I see Cursillo as a tremendous way to boost leaders in our parish communities. For those of you who don't know, Cursillo is a residential weekend. Cursillo is Spanish for a short course, and it's basically a residential weekend where there are a series of talks on Christianity and on the church and what it means to be in the church. It's a very powerful learning experience, and it's exceptionally good for leaders or people who may be called forth to be a leader, because not only do you get sort of a solid crash course in Christianity, the sacraments, spirituality, liturgy, all kinds of things, you experience the power of the Holy Spirit in the context of community in a way that's a little bit different than other places. I've been clear also with the Secretariat that I believe they should rename themselves to be the Ottawa Anglican Cursillo Ministry, not a movement. I think it confuses people, the idea that you have to join some movement of some kind instead of, the Secretariat coming to Tim and Michael saying, listen, Cursillo is something that might be really useful for you as you lift up and train leaders. So I would like it to be seen, whether the name changes or not, as a ministry to the parishes of the diocese and not as a movement you need to join. I think that's hampered its reputation in the past, that you're joining some people say some sort of weird cultic thing. It's not that. But the strength of Cursillo would be the weekends, that intense experience of learning, of praying, of understanding how the Holy Spirit can move through the community. So I'm very much in favor of Cursillo as a ministry to enable leadership development within our parish churches. Okay.
Merci pour votre question, Véronique. Est-ce qu'il y en a d'autres questions, commentaires, other questions or any comments that you'd like to make at this point? Yes, Marion.
I just have a question about inequities within the Anglican Church of Canada in terms of what's happening in the north compared to what's happening down here. And when you find out that there are many, many people who are dedicating their life to serving the church up north, and they're in their communities, but they get no stipend. And there might be a number of reasons for that that I don't know about, but I'm just wondering, ASIP is going to do their own leadership, but how is the Anglican Church of Canada supporting the northern communities?
Sure.
And yes, there's disparity that needs to be addressed.
Well, your point is well made. I have met a number of Indigenous clergy who are non-stipendiary and probably work more hours than any stipendiary priest here in the South. The nature of ministry in some parts of the North, because of simply geographic factors, but also the intensity of need in some communities is such that non-stipendiary clergy are deeply, like literally going to a hospital, another center, and staying with the family for days. You know, it's a different reality for sure, let alone what we know in some Indigenous communities, high rates of suicide and other dysfunction brought about by the colonial experience are there. So it's a very intense ministry. On the one hand, you know, when you put $1 on the plate, or better still, $10,000 on the plate, a portion of that goes to our national church, and a portion of that goes to what we call the Council of the North, which subsidizes, or not the right word, which contributes to, makes an offering to the ministry of northern dioceses. But more significantly, there is emerging, more than emerging, there is forming now a self-determining Indigenous church called the Sacred Circle. Unfortunately, General Synod, the every 3-year meeting will be postponed for a year, but coming to the next General Synod will be very clear proposals for how the self-determining Indigenous church will operate and what level of funding might be provided by the Anglican Church of Canada, which is a sister church. You know, it's not separate from the Anglican Church of Canada, but it is almost like a province within the Anglican Church of Canada. I have learned that self-determination means if you're a non-Indigenous person, you step back, listen, pray, and wait to be invited in. You know, we want to fix things all the time as non-Indigenous people, and sometimes in catastrophic ways. But the self-determining Indigenous church is taking shape within its own councils. Advice is being sought from beyond that community where required, and in the end there will be a relationship which probably will have a financial component, but we want to be invited into that as a non-Indigenous church rather than presuming, you know, what is needed and what can we do to save. So it would be a partnership in a new way. But the concern is real. If you're looking for a parish partnership of some kind, you might want to carefully build a relationship with a northern parish and get to know one another very, very carefully, much as I said about discerning a local ministry, and establish a relationship with Anglican Indigenous people in a parish that is more remote. And it's not always a financial arrangement either. Sometimes you learn more than you offer in those types of relationships. Yeah.
Thank you, Bishop. Catherine.
Yes, hi, Bishop. Thank you very much for that response. I'm an Indigenous member of the All My Relations Circle here in the diocese. My maternal grandparents spent many years in an Anglican-run residential school, and my family has been quite connected to the Anglican Church ever since. I do think that, and since I have followed the work of the Shape of Parish Ministry, I do think that that has been so well framed as a positive development and a way of going forward that perhaps is closer to what you might call authentic ministry. And so I think you've done very well in framing that as an exciting, positive potential, and I hope that framing can be heard and understood by the parishes. I think at the same time, it's also important to have a fairly critical analysis of the past. And I even heard this morning a little bit of nostalgia for what might have been seen to be the good old days at St. Thomas and at Church of the Resurrection. But I think part of what will really strengthen the path forward is to have a sense of the things that the Anglican Church and the diocese and perhaps these two parishes have to answer for. And Marion pointed out some of the situation and the inequities in more far-off areas, shall we say. But looking at our own context here in Ottawa, in Algonquin territory, and what are the ways that we can more accurately understand that past, which might, one hopes, make it perhaps even easier to leave behind, and a sense that there are parts of the past that we do want to and need to understand more thoroughly and then put behind us with a view to moving forward in a new way. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that.
Miigwech. Thank you. We, as a church, as the Anglican Church of Canada, came to terms with the effects of our mindset, our participation in misguided government policy. We came to terms with that first by listening to the stories of Indigenous people. And that led to the first apology that was provided from the primate of the Anglican Church, I believe it was 1992. That apology, you can actually watch it. If you go to the Anglican Church of Canada, maybe Tim could find it. There's a little sort of clip about what happened. That apology wasn't one that came in the middle of a cathedral church in a photo op. It was born of several days in a meeting of the Sacred Circle, listening to the wrenching stories, the truth that were told by survivors and their families. And when you listen to Primate Pierre's apology, it sounds like a poem almost, a prayer, like it's heartfelt. And Murray Sinclair, who spoke at the cathedral a number of years ago, used that language. He said it was sincere and heartfelt. If you go to the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and you look at all the apologies that have been offered, the one offered by the Anglican Church of Canada stands out because you can tell it's coming from this visceral place of recognition. And that was a turning point for us. We recognized that we were perpetrators. To say that good things may have happened is not, we have to, good things may have happened, but it was part of a misguided, destructive process of acculturation, some would say genocide or cultural genocide. And we were participant in that. And we moved from that to taking a path of reconciliation. So we repented. We acknowledged that, yes, we were perpetrators, and now we seek to walk the path of reconciliation. That led in 2019 to a second apology being issued, which was for the spiritual harm that was caused. That wasn't specifically referenced. And that apology is important because it spoke to how we were so spiritually arrogant to think that God had only spoken to us in our tradition as Europeans, and that we needed to bring that to a place where we believed that God was not present. That's blasphemous, actually. To think that God, the creator of all things, was not here in North America before Anglicans got here is the height of blasphemy, frankly. So that change in our posture made us realize we have to walk humbly on this path of reconciliation. Many years ago, when the residential school agreement was being sorted out with the government, our church was pushing for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. One of our dioceses famously said, the Bishop Cruikshank said, "We will apologize and we will offer all our assets. Our soul depends on it." I mean, this is very courageous. And the bishop said, what are the assets to us? All we need is a Bible, bread, and wine, and we can continue. That's very, very courageous thinking. And that push to reveal had a huge influence on the formation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which, our church participated in, whether it was finding archival records, attending meetings to be present, and so on, which led to the calls to action, which are calls to action to the churches, as well as Canadian society and so on. So the calls to action are really the operating end of what we ought to be doing, and key among those is self-determination and education. We need to change, we need a new relationship with Indigenous people. And the Indian Act, which is a massive artifact of our colonial heritage, is abhorrent. Yet it's all we have right now, and it needs to be changed. But self-determination, some of you may have heard about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, been adopted by our government. The core concept there and in the calls to action is Indigenous self-determination. And that means we don't know what another people need or want or aspire to. And we need to hold space for that to be sorted out, including, if you talk, again, the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa's 125th, listen to the lecture by Michelle Good. It's online. A number of Indigenous people say, reconciliation, what does it look like? Control over our resources. That's the starting point. Most Canadians have no idea that that's what is being sought for whatever reason. So reconciliation is a way of life. It's not a journey with an endpoint. It's a way of life that involves for non-Indigenous people largely to say we need to walk in this way which is respectful of all people and acknowledges the right of every human being to self-determine. Respect the dignity of our baptismal vows are really the path forward. So if you've not sort of studied the calls to action as they relate to churches, I encourage you to do that. It's a great study. Just sit in a circle and read out the calls to action one day and listen to where we are being called to account by a commission of Canada.